I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. On today's show, we're back with 5 new USMNT questions that have been on my mind this week. We'll look at the current center back and attacking midfielder depth charts, what to watch as the winter transfer window winds down, Jack McGlynn's World Cup chances, and what to keep an eye on during MLS preseason. To help me today, I've invited Ryan Tolmich to join the show. Ryan is the American soccer correspondent for Goal. So Ryan, let's start with this USMNT center back depth chart, and I want to talk about Noah Banks specifically. A couple weeks ago on the show, I posed a question as to whether he had moved up to center back number 5 behind Chris Richards, Tim Ream, Mark McKenzie, and Miles Robinson. Here we are just a few weeks down the road, and I'm already thinking that is a little bit outdated, and maybe I need to think bigger because he continues to play so much in the Bundesliga and play so well for FC Augsburg. So I think, Chris Richards, Tim Ream seem to be Pochettino's 1 and 2. So you can argue about the Tim Ream, all you want, but I mean, Pochettino consistently, puts him out there. But now I'm starting to wonder, is Noah Banks catching up to Miles Robinson and Mark McKenzie? And so the question for you is, has he reached those guys, past those guys? And if not, how close is he getting?
He's got to be close, right? That's the thing with the center back pool is that it is deep, but it is open in that sense. And there are a lot of guys that are kind of fighting for those 5-ish spots that'll probably be at the World Cup. You look at someone like Banks, like you said, is clearly a rising star, clearly a player that's getting better. If you watch his performances in the Bundesliga, I think the big takeaway is the confidence. You've kind of seen him grow over the last few weeks and months as a player that feels like he could play and is doing the little things more than he was before, because I think he has belief that he can do them. I spoke to Noah Kai in the fall when he was in U.S. camp, and one of the first things you notice about him is that he's huge. Height-wise, he's extremely tall, and he's athletic, and he's quick, and he's clearly pretty damn smart because he's playing at the level that he is in the Bundesliga. And I think when you get to a World Cup, that becomes more valuable. Having a player that has size, that has speed, is more valuable just because that's the way that World Cups play. They're not tactical masterclasses. They're not big overarching tactical battles because you don't have time. So one of those things is you want center backs that can handle themselves, that could win one-on-one on battles, that can track back and put out fires when those moments come. So yeah, I think he has to be looked at as someone in the mix. I would really like to see him get some minutes in March just to see how he stacks up against that level, how he fits in with the group, just because we haven't really seen that yet. But yeah, he has to be someone that's at the very least under consideration, even if it might be a little bit too soon for him.
Okay, so you've seen the guy, in person, and you talked about his size. I've only seen him on TV, and he looks kind of like tall and lanky to me. But is that how he is in person, or is he like pretty like stout?
Yeah,
as well.
Look, when you look at what you want in a center back, you want someone like Banks in that sense, and that you want someone with the height to win headers, the athleticism to handle it, but also the speed to get back and make things, help put out fires and messes that'll happen. So that's the thing is, like, in terms of modern center backs, like, this is what you're looking for, right? These are the type of players that you're looking for. So yeah, it's something that, look, that's the thing too, is he's also like 18, 19 years old. So there is time to bulk up and grow. And who knows what the version of Noah Banks in 2030 looks like compared to 2026. But yeah, look, at the very least, he's one for the future. And I think it is a very valid question that you're asking. Is he one for the present? Because it's pretty close, just based on what we've seen in the Bundesliga so far.
Okay. So do you think, if you had to project, a center back depth chart, do you think he's moved above Miles Robinson or Mark McKenzie yet, or would you still put him below those guys?
At the moment, I would still put him below those guys just because we need to see it with the national team. It's very hard to get your first cap in a World Cup environment. You have to have that experience behind you, which again lends me to say, ask me again in April. If we see him play in March and he puts in even a decent performance in those games, then yeah, like let's talk about it. He's in the World Cup. But until we see that, it's just hard to envision throwing out a player into a World Cup environment and saying, enjoy your first cap, buddy. Because that's usually not how these things work. Is it possible? Yeah, absolutely. Like we've seen it before. But it's one of those things where at a center back, a position that's so determined on, chemistry and intelligence and familiarity and confidence, like it's just hard to throw a young player into that environment having never seen it before. So if we see him in March and he does well, then like, oh yeah, like we'll talk about him 4, 3, 2, like right in that mix. But until then, it's just so hard to judge him against guys that have done it and that have that experience and are guys that clearly Mauricio Pochettino has trust in if he does have to throw them out into a World Cup game.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. It's kind of like he's got the resume with his club performance. It's just like any other job. Somebody, they have the resume, but then until you actually see him in the job, you can't really decide. Yeah. And so until we see him in a USMNT game and get some minutes, I agree with you. You can't put him above those guys.
Yeah, it's tough. And again, like the resume is great, but there is a transition between club and country. It's a different style of game. It's different asks. You have different teammates. It's not apples to apples in that comparison. And we've seen it with plenty of other players who've played well for their club and not so well for their country, or vice versa. There are guys that are incredible for their country but can never find a place on the club level. It's just a different sport in that sense, and it doesn't always translate. So you do have to figure out how it translates for Banks, who is a young player who is clearly doing well in the environment he's in day to day, but can he also translate that to an environment where he's with a team for a couple of days and has to go play? It's a different ask, and it's not impossible, but yeah, it's something I want to see at least once before we throw him out into a World Cup.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's brought into the March camp, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if Pochettino gives him a start, in one of those matches against Belgium and Portugal, just to test that very thing, because he has to know, is this guy worth my time to consider for this World Cup or not? And he has to get that data. So that's one of the things looking ahead to March, I'm going to be most excited to see is, does Banks get his opportunity, and how does he look? Let's go to another position on the depth chart that I've been kind of curious about. And the person who's made me think about this actually is Brenden Aaronson. Okay, because he's been performing. He's somebody that, man, he kind of seemed on the bubble to me only a few months ago, and he's playing so well at Leeds. You see him getting the production with some goals. You see, like, I'm seeing these videos on social media of him getting standing ovations from the crowd, when he walks off the field. He's been named man of the match a few times. And so I've started thinking, okay, could this guy be breaking into the USMNT, starting lineup? But then you think about what position it would be, and if Pochettino's playing in, with the three in the back in possession, you would think it'd be one of those number 10s next to Pulisic.
Yep.
And so that's the next thing I want to get into is the depth chart for those number 10s or attacking midfielders. Who do you think is the guy, whether it's Brenden Aaronson or somebody else, that is most likely at this point to be that other number 10 next to Christian Pulisic?
I like that you said that it seemed like Brenden Aaronson had fallen into the bubble, just because I think there was a point where he was outside of the World Cup roster. You look at the Gold Cup and he hardly played, and that was a team where you looked at the players also, clearly Diego Luna was ahead of him. Clearly Malik Tillman was ahead of him. Christian wasn't there. And then you see Gio come back in the fall and perform. And the question was very real and asking, is Brenden Aaronson the right sort of player to bring along to the World Cup when you have all of these other options? And I think it was a fair question. And you look at how he's responded to that, and it's like, yeah, that's what you want, man. I've talked with Brenden a few times about the perception of him, which I think is very interesting, because the perception of him is that all he does is run around, and that he brings energy, and that he presses, and he does all these little things well. And to his credit, he does do all those things well, and it's very noticeable, and that's great. But the thing he's sort of been fighting is that he wants to change that perception and show that he can play. He could play, he could score, he can impact games. And I think these last few weeks have been the first time that you've really seen that on a consistent basis, which I think has done wonders for his World Cup case. Now you look at it, and he's not just a guy that could, come off the bench to help you close out a game. Maybe he's a guy that can come off the bench and help you change a game. So I think he's right there in that mix. You ask about the number 10 spot alongside Pulisic. He has to be in that mix. Tillman is right there in that mix. Weston McKennie, for me, is right there in that mix. I think he's sort of better suited for that spot in the way that the U.S. is currently built than maybe as the holding guy next to Tyler Adams. So I think Weston's right there. For me, I think I might actually lean towards Weston depending on what the other team is offering in the game that you're playing, because I think he does offer so much and you do need him on the field. But yeah, it's a crowded spot, but I would say that I think Aronson has risen above where he was, 6-7 months ago, and brought himself right into the question of, should this guy not just be on the team, but also should he have a role, whether that's off the bench or as a starter, because he is proving that he can do it at the highest level.
I favor McKennie as well, because even though he's not playing there with his club, that's where Pochettino has been playing him. A lot of times I listen to other, shows and people discuss Wes McKennie, and they always seem to put him more as the holding midfielder, one of these central midfielders. But Pochettino doesn't play him there, and he's talked about that in his press conferences, that he sees him as more of a forward attacking player.
Yeah, you want Weston to be free in whatever sense that is, because he is a player that thrives on arriving into the box late and roaming. He's a player that does so well when he has the freedom to impact the game in ways that most other players can't. And you see that sometimes with Juventus, where he plays as a wing back, but he has a little bit of wiggle room to go do some things. And that's the thing with him, is when you put him next to someone like Tyler Adams, the thing is with Tyler Adams is that he's going to be a missile. He's going to be running all over the field, breaking up plays, doing things. So the guy next to him is, you want someone that's going to hold that space, so that when Tyler Adams does break those things up, there's still another body there. And that's not what Weston's best at. He's best, again, at being that missile himself. So that's the thing, is you want to find a way to unleash both of those guys. And I think this is the best way to kind of do that, is give Tyler someone next to him that could sit and hold and do all the other things, and then let Weston do his thing as the attacking midfielder. So yeah, we'll have to see what that ends up looking like, but I think at the very least it's something that Mauricio Pochettino is considering, and something that I would consider if I was in charge of the national team.
Yeah, I think this is going to be another one of those positions that Pochettino is going to continue to test and tweak and experiment with in March and the June friendlies, trying to find that best combination, and because it's a very close race, McKennie, Tillman. Yeah.
It's also one that's game by game. Because again,
True.
You look at, we'll just use an example, the group that you would want to start against Portugal, one of the best teams in the world, probably doesn't look like the group that you would want to start against Australia, which is a game you're going to have more of the ball. When you get to the knockout rounds, the group that got you through the group stage might not be the group that gets you through the knockout rounds, for that very reason, because these games are going to look different. So yeah, again, I don't know if there has to be a set quote-unquote depth chart, just because I think it can be a little bit fluid and it can be a little bit game dependent, because that's the nature of this group. There's a lot of different personalities, a lot of different skill sets, and I think, look, that's a good thing. This is a good problem to have, that Mauricio Pochettino won't be losing sleep over, because it is a good thing to have a bunch of different tools that you could put into different situations.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing for Pochettino. I do think one of these players, maybe two of them, could get left off, that final World Cup roster, because it's getting there's just so many possibilities between McKennie, Tillman, Reyna, Luna, Aronson, maybe even throws in Dejas, his name in there too. One or two of those guys aren't going to make it. And it's just going to be really interesting to see what happens in March, especially who's given a shot and who takes their shot, because that's another one of those positions that I think is wide open. I had for the longest time felt Tillman was the leading candidate. And to be fair, I haven't watched a lot of his matches at Leverkusen, but I know he's not getting much production. He seems to be starting week in and week out, but I don't really see his name on the goal or assist sheet.
It's been a weird one for him in that if you look at the advanced stats and you use the eye test, it looks like he should be contributing. He's a player, he's making things happen. It's just not happening. And some of that might be bad luck. Some of that might be adjustment to the league. There's so many different factors to it. But it's one of those where the stats might be a little a little bit misleading in the sense that like he is producing, it's just not turning into the end product you want. At the end of the day, you need end product. This is the number, when you're playing that position, you got to add things. So look, it is a knock against him, but it's one of those things where I kind of do want to check back in 3 months and see if that's still happening. Because all things say that he should be doing better than he is, which is, again, numbers don't lie, but sometimes they do a little bit.
Yeah, maybe you just need more time for the stats to kind of even out to face like reality, So I see what you're saying there. Okay, well, speaking of Weston McKennie, where I want to go next is the winter transfer window, the European winter transfer window, because he's one of the players that there was have been some rumors that he could be moved because his contract runs out, this year with Juve. But the winter transfer period for Europe ends February 2nd, so we're down to our final weeks. What are you watching for in these final weeks for U.S. internationals out there?
It's an interesting one because you get the sense that everyone's afraid to mess up in a sense, and I'm not saying that negatively. I'm just saying that in a World Cup year, if you're going to take a swing 4 months before the World Cup roster comes out, it better be the right swing. You can't afford to make a move and then have an easing in period and not really start like that. You can't do that right now. There can't be a sense where we make a move for the future because this move needs to be for right now. So there are a lot of guys that are in positions where it's like, should they be in a different place next season? Sure. But like, they're not going to do that now because you don't want to mess up what you've got going. I'll use an example, like someone like Alex Freeman. Has he earned a chance to make a move to a huge team in Europe? Probably. Like, yeah, he probably should. He's been fantastic. Was probably the best fullback in MLS last year. But does it make sense for him to go somewhere and then get eased into life in Europe and start with the reserves and work his way up? Or does it make sense for him to put up a whole bunch of assists for Orlando City and earn his spot at the World Cup? It's like probably the second one. So that's the thing is you look at some of these guys in MLS that, have been talked about a lot. It probably just makes a lot of sense for them to kill it in MLS and then maybe move after the World Cup. Someone like Josh Sargent is doing the opposite, where he's looking at it and it seems like he's ready to come back to MLS because he thinks that'll give him a chance to not just, have his chance at the World Cup, but also, have something of, a home life for family and find happiness on off the field, which obviously adds a whole bunch to the on the field stuff. So that's the thing is you look at the situations and everyone wants to do the right thing, and doing the right thing is tough when there's so much risk involved for a lot of these guys. So look, if you're a guy that's on the bubble, probably don't take a swing. If you're a guy that's out of the picture right now, maybe you take that swing. But anyone that feels like they're in the mix right now is probably just going to stand pat and figure things out and then reassess after the World Cup. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to be a part of that roster this summer, and anything you do that jeopardizes that is going to be pretty tough.
Yeah, so maybe that's what Josh Sargent is thinking. I mean, I know what I've read is he wants to go back to MLS primarily for family reasons, but he also doesn't seem to be on the bubble anymore. He's at
the very least fighting for a spot.
Yeah,
in the sense that like when you look at the strikers, there's one clear one in Balogun who I think is put himself ahead. Pepe's right there. If he's fit, everything's all good. And then you have that second sort of mix of Ajimong, Wright, Sargent, Brandon Vasquez. If he comes back healthy, who knows? He's someone that was right there before he got hurt. And it's like you're probably taking only one or two of those guys. So if those guys are obviously the ones who are under pressure to perform, and you look at Ajimong and Wright and they're scoring goals, and right now Sargent isn't and is looking for a new start, and that's great. But yeah, he's one that I feel like is in that point where I talked about where it's you take this swing if you feel like you need to, and it seems that he needs to at the moment. So I can understand from a footballing perspective why he would want to do this, and then that family stuff is obviously very important and icing on the cake, and do what you got to do to make you happy. But if you could also do that while also pushing for a World Cup spot, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, the guy probably next to Sargent I'm keeping a close eye on is Pepe, because despite him being injured, it seems like there's still interest, from Fulham and some other like Premier League teams that see him as a long-term gain, and they're not too bothered by this arm injury he has right now. I think it's unlikely to happen. I hope it doesn't happen. I would just really like to see him finish out the season with PSV, be at the top of his game for them, help them win their Eredivisie again, and then come into the World Cup, have a go World Cup, and then get an even bigger transfer in the summers is what I would really like to see.
Pepe's such an interesting one because, like you said, look, sources have told me that there are Premier League teams that are chasing him, and you could understand why he's scoring all these goals. But he's also a player that'll know better than anyone how important it is to get this right. Because at the end of the day, he missed the last World Cup because he made the wrong transfer. That's it. You know, he was in a good place scoring goals for FC Dallas. He takes his European shot at Augsburg. It doesn't work out right away, and you miss the World Cup. You know, and he's the perfect example of making sure you get this right at this time in a cycle. So I think, you know, he might have learned from that. Also, if you look at the Premier League, there's a lot of money and a lot of prestige, and everyone has some ego and wants to prove they can do it, and everyone will be backing themselves to do it. So it is one to watch because he has clearly earned that move. The question is, you know, does it all work out in right now? Does it work out, like you said, in the summer? How does his arm injury sort of change the timeline because he won't be playing until March? You know, what does that all look like? But yeah, I think he's a perfect example of what we were saying before, where if you're going to take the swing, it's got to be one that you know is going to work, because if not, you're playing with a World Cup, and that's the tough thing to do.
Yeah. And PSV ultimately will have their price tag. You know what I mean? As much as they say they're not going to move them, there is a price that they would. And right now it seems they're far away from that, but you never know. I mean, if one of these teams gets aggressive and they really want them, I do think at the end of the day, PSV, there is a number that
Premier League teams got more money than anybody can imagine, and there's always a number. Like you said, there is. If anyone can come up with the money to make it happen, it's teams playing in England. So look, we'll have to see. It's definitely one to keep an eye on over these next 2 weeks that are left in the window.
Okay, next guy I want to talk about is Jack McGlynn. You put out a feature on him pretty recently. That was awesome. I'd encourage everyone to go out and read that piece. And so you got me thinking about him because I'm a Jack McGlynn fan. He's somebody, a year ago I went to give him any shot of making a World Cup roster. I'm amazed at the progress he made in 2025, but then he got injured, at the end of the year. So, you spoke to him recently, what you know about him, what you know about the team. Where would you put his World Cup chances of making the roster? Is it greater than 50% or less than 50%, at this time?
That's tough. Just because, like we've said, there's so much depth in several of these positions. And right now he's one that I'm still not fully sure where he fits. And that, is he in the 10 race, or is he in the holding midfielder race, or is he a wing back? Like, I don't know exactly where he fits with this national team, just because he was hurt for most of the fall run. He missed that chance to play when the U.S. was in that system. And that was one of the things we talked about, was that was a bummer, watching the U.S. go on this run and playing so well in this new system that he didn't really get to play in, and not being able to be a part of that was tough. So very much can understand that. But yeah, again, he's one that I'd like to see maybe get a chance in March to see, like, all right, where does he fit into all of this? In terms of his World Cup spot, I am a firm believer in whether you have 23 or 26 players on the roster, you want those last few to offer something different, to be unique, to offer something that they do at an elite level, that if you have to break a glass in case of emergency, they could do something. And he's one that kind of fits in that mold to me, and that he has an elite left foot. Like, that guy could strike a ball, whether that's a free kick, whether that's a long distance shot, whether that's a crossfield pass. Like, he could hit the ball. And do you have a spot in your roster for if you're down a goal late in a game and you just need someone to come in and maybe ping one from range to tie it up, or you have a free kick, or you're trying to break down a team and you need someone that could hit a pass that could open something up? Do you have a spot for that? And he's one of those players that maybe you find that spot for. Now, there are a couple players in that mix right now. Someone I would say like Gio Reyna right now is kind of in that mix, because you're probably not starting him, but you're looking at him as a player where it's like, if I need to open up a game, do I want him on my bench because he's someone who could do that? So yeah, I think he's fighting in those spots for not necessarily a prime backup role because there's so much depth, but as the guy who is an emergency option, is someone that could come in and change a game, is someone that will put his head down and do the right things to be a part of a World Cup, that will work hard in training, that will push everybody, that could contend at multiple positions. So yeah, I think he's right in that mix. But again, I just want to see where he fits positionally, because that's the big question for me, because the way the U.S. has changed so much in just a few months since we last saw him play for the team.
How is the injury recovery going? What did he say to you about that? Is he back training? Is he?
Yeah, he says he's all good.
Okay.
Everything he says should be fine. Obviously, look, every player, it's going to take some time to get back to full fitness, especially, MLS offseason. Everyone's, sort of got to work their way back. But, one of the things he was saying to me that I thought, was pretty interesting was just that the hardest part of this wasn't the physical recovery, because that part does stink, going and doing rehab and dealing with all this stuff and rolling around on a knee scooter, like that part's tough. But it was the mental side, the boredom, the lack of routine, because you lose that routine of training every day, that feeling of watching the Dynamo and the national team kind of continue on and have to play without him. And he said one of the things, like I said, I thought was most interesting from that interview was he looked at it as a time to get better. So how do I watch film? What are things I could study? Who could I talk to? What could I watch to learn? And yeah, we'll have to see what that looks like coming back. But again, it's going to take some time for all of these guys in MLS to get fit and to get to their best, but time is not on anyone's side. So it's going to be interesting to see how all these guys start the season, because there is that increased pressure that you basically need to be firing by the start of May. And if not, you're probably not going to a World Cup. So there's a finite amount of time to find your fitness before this all gets going.
All right. I'm going to put it at 51%.
He's right.
I mean,
I would say 50-50 feels about right. So
yeah, he's going to be 49, 50, 51 like for the next couple months here. But kind of due to what you said, he does some things at an elite level. He gives you the long range, distance shot. He's one of the best passers on the team, if not the best passer. I see him come into games as a sub and just immediately make a spot on pass that other players hadn't made, throughout the game. So I think, and Pochettino consistently has called him up. I mean, he was called into the camp when he got injured, right? He just couldn't go. I think it was what's the October or November? I forget which one, but Pochettino's consistently called him in. He's consistently put him out on the field in crucial minutes, and so now it's just can he get off to a good start in the MLS season? I have a feeling about Jack McGlynn that Poch really likes him, and that he's just a confident kid, and he's going to find a way to get there. And we'll have to see what he does in the preseason and once the MLS season gets kicked off. So speaking of MLS preseason, that's where I want to end here. In the I think it was last week, most of the MLS teams started their preseason camps, and so those are underway. What's one storyline or a player you're watching in MLS preseason?
Yeah, for me, we talked about him earlier. For me, the one is Alex Freeman, just because I'm so interested in what year 2 looks like for him. You look at all the things that we saw in year 1, and again, he was probably the best fullback in MLS, at least from an attacking output sense. And you look at the skill set he possesses, the size, the athleticism. I talked to Oscar Pareja about him last year, and he said the thing that he noticed about him immediately was the athleticism. You know where his dad comes from, all this stuff. But then the instincts were what really convinced Orlando City that they had something, and that even if he didn't know everything yet, the instincts were there for him to figure it out pretty quickly. So I want to see how he develops, just because, one, can he fight for a starting spot? Can he push to start as the right wing back? Can he push Serginho Dest in that sense? But also, could he potentially be the third center back? That's something we saw in like a sort of look in that last Uruguay game, where in the attack, the right wing back, whether that's Serginho Dest, effectively plays as a winger, and the third center back on that right side effectively plays as a fullback. Is that something that we could see from the U.S.? Could that be his path towards starting? Could that answer add another center back to that position? We were already talking about that position, but he's someone that I think can contribute to this national team in a real meaningful way, not just in 26 and beyond, but he's also still a really young player that only has 1 year of professional experience under his belt. So how does he handle that? How do things change? How does he get better? I think he's such an interesting player to watch just because he has such a high ceiling and can do so many things on and off the ball that can really help this national team. So I'll just have to see if, again, he can help them in 2026 or if it'll be beyond. But I think he's a player that can be a real difference maker if everything goes right in these first few weeks of the season.
Yeah, he's a stud. I mean, I have very little question that one day this guy is going to be playing at the highest of levels, that there is. I mean, he's the other one that surprised me with how he progressed with the national team in 2025. I mean, if I had to pick a starting lineup today, who I thought Pochettino would go with, I think he'd be out there on that like right-sided center back, fullback, whatever you want to call it, helping in the build-out. I mean, that's where he played in the Gold Cup. He looked awesome doing that against Uruguay. I mean, that was probably the best game I've seen him play.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That guy's incredible.
Like you said, you saw the very real progression in the comfort. And again, we talked about it with Banks. I spoke with Alex Freeman at the Gold Cup, and he was saying he remembered walking out for that Turkey game and being scared, man, because you looked at the players on the other side, and Kenan Yildiz plays for Juventus, and Arda Güler plays for Real Madrid, and he'd played, I think it was at that point, between 8 and 10 total MLS games for Orlando City. So it's just like this was a new level, and it was scary. It was, am I going to be able to play at this level? Am I good enough? And then you looked at couple months later where he was playing against Uruguay, and it was, I know I could play this level. I know that I can perform. I know that I can contribute. And, I actually spoke to him a couple weeks ago, and he was saying, I wanted a hat trick. He was like, I felt like I had a third in me in that Uruguay game, and it didn't happen, but like I felt it, like I thought I had a third. And it's like you look at the progression of, again, a player that was nervous about where he fit with everything in May, that by November wanted a hat trick against one of the best teams in the world. And I think that's the most interesting thing. And again, why it's so important to get these guys on the field, because you see that progression, and you saw it with so many players over the last year. But I think he's the best example of it, because it's very real to see. And there was a tangible result right there at the end of the year that showed how far he came, but also how far he could still go, because there's still so much left to do for a player that young and still has so little experience at the highest level.
Yeah, one of those goals he scored against Uruguay, I forget if it was his first or second, but the one where he got the ball in the box, kind of dribbled around some people and just basically muscled his way into the goal. That was my goal of the year. That was my goal of the year for the USMNT.
Right past Ronald Araujo, who plays for Barcelona.
Yeah.
And again, like the players he received that ball around were playing for Manchester United and Barcelona. And that does wonders for a player's confidence, man. Like that really shows a player that they could play at a certain level. So again, yeah, that's the importance of having those tests and having those moments. And I think he's the player that really came out better because of them.
Yeah. Couple guys I'm watching. First of all, the goalkeepers. I mean, you think about like pretty much everyone in contention for a goalkeeping spot on this roster is playing in MLS.
Yeah,
you know
MLS
what I mean?
is goalkeeper central right now.
And so, I don't think Matt Freese has too much to prove or lose, in this MLS preseason or the first month. But like Zach Steffen, Matt Turner especially, can Zach Steffen stay healthy, and get himself some game time? Patrick Schulte, who I think a lot of folks see as the number 3 goalkeeper, right now. How does he look? And so seeing how these goalkeepers, if they stay healthy in preseason and can get fine-tuned and ready to go, because nobody in MLS has much time before March, before the March friendlies, to impress enough to get called in. So they have to be healthy and get off to good starts.
Yep, and that's for everybody. Like you said, March friendlies are right around the corner, and that's effectively the last chance to get on the field before that World Cup roster is submitted. So yeah, again, if you're a guy that's on the bubble, again, you look at the goalkeeper position, and there's realistically 5-6 guys that are competing for 3 spots. How does that shake out, and how quickly can these guys start? Because again, like a broken finger can be the difference between going to a World Cup and not going to a World Cup. That's the line. That's where we're at now. So again, it's all about starting the season hot, getting into that March camp, and then seeing what happens. And if a player can do that, they've got the shot.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you're a player on the bubble, you have an injury, you don't get into March camp, that could be it for you. The coach might not be willing to take a chance on you without like seeing you in the March camp to win your spot.
Yeah, that could be it. And again, look, I know that Mauricio Pochettino and his staff have been doing a whole lot of homework, and they've been doing it for months, and they know these guys. And in that sense, I don't think an injury is going to completely ruin someone's chances. But again, it will give someone else a chance to show why they deserve it. It's not going to hurt someone necessarily, but it'll open the door for someone to help themselves. And that's the thing, is if you have an opportunity where you can go out there and help yourself, at this point you have to take it, because there aren't many left. So that's where it's at. So all you have to do is put yourself in a position where you can help your case a little bit. And the best way to do that is starting well in MLS. For guys in Europe, continue playing well in Europe. Do what you got to do and get in that March camp and make your final statement, whether that's on the field, in training, at the team hotel, being a good guy to be around at dinner, whatever it is. Like whatever you got to do to show why you should be a part of that group, it's time for all these guys to have to go out there and do it.
Yeah, fully agree. Fully agree. We don't have long, folks, until this World Cup is going to be upon us. So that's the 5 questions for this week. Ryan, for those who want to follow your work on social media or somewhere else, where are you pointing people to nowadays? Yeah,
I'm still on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. Posted most of my best work on there, but I've also made a new Instagram, Ryan Tolman's Goal. We'll be posting soon more videos and social content and news and everything on there, just branching out a little bit. So yeah, follow me on X and Instagram, and we'll go from there. It's going to be a fun ride to the World Cup. I'm really excited to go through with it, to see it, to watch how everything changes, and ultimately to be around this summer for what should be a fun summer for everyone who cares about American soccer or soccer in general. It's going to be a wild ride. So yeah, I'm excited to get 2026 really rolling.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show again this week. I look forward to having you on again later this year. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.